Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another episode of Ecoville, your show that promotes environmental conservation. Today on the show, we are privileged to be joined by our sister from Malawi, Gloria Kamoto, who is the 2021 Goldman Environmental Prize Recipient for Africa. For those who may not know the prestigious awards, they are also known as the Green Nobel Prize and are given to environmental activists from each of the world's 6 geographic regions, which are Africa, Asia, Europe, island nations, North America, and South and Central America. Gloria won the award for Africa in recognition of her work to fight the production and distribution of single-use plastic in Malawi. Welcome to the program, Gloria. Firstly, congratulations on winning this award, not only for Malawi, but the whole of Africa.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and thank you for having me on your show. I'm very honored to have received the prize on behalf of the people that I work with here in Malawi, but also for the continent. So it's quite exciting. Thank you.
It is. Firstly, we want to know, who is Gloria Kamoto?
So I am a young woman, a young Black woman. I'm very privileged to be in that demographic and to be awarded, this very prestigious award on behalf of a lot of people just like me, young women, young Africans who are very committed to creating a better environment, but also making Africa and their homes a better place. I work with the Center for Environmental Policy and Advocacy as a program manager. And I also sit on the Global Council for Publish What You Pay, where I represent Anglophone Africa. I have grown up in Malawi, and I've always really been passionate about people. And I think that's sort of what got me into the work that I do. And yeah, I am also currently studying with as a canon scholar with the University of London for my master's degree.
Wow, amazing for a young lady to be achieving such things at such a young age. There's something peculiar about your journey to winning the Goldman Prize. It actually begins with a goat eating plastic and leads you to winning the Goldman Prize. Take us through that journey.
So, I think it's really interesting because the Goldman Prize sort of took me on a journey to also find my why. And that's something that I sort of struggled with for a long time to sort of understand. I guess you always have an interest to know why you do certain things. And having gone through this journey, I had to go back and really think about, where did this start? And, just that's how you understand that little encounters sort of shape what we do and why we do certain things. And for me, it was working on a project that I didn't really enjoy, actually. But just experiencing how people's lives were being impacted by something that seemed so external to them. I think for me, it really caught my interest. And so when the development around the single-use plastics ban started to happen, and specifically when companies took up an injunction against the enforcement of the ban, I think there was a lot of people that were interested to see this ban in place. And for me, my interest was because I had that experience with farmers and seeing people affected. So it's one thing to see the pollution around you. It's another thing to really see the impact that it has on people's lives. And that's sort of, for me, where it started. And so we came together, a group of us, and we were very passionate people, a lot of young people who said we need to do something more than just sit back and wait for this to happen. And that's sort of how we started our movement.
And all of this is happening, and you are only, at the time, you're only 25 years old. And you managed to take huge plastic manufacturers to the Malawian High Court to try and stop the manufacture of single-use plastic. And it's a 5-year battle between you and those companies. And finally, you win after 5 years. But what I want to know is, what inspires a person who is so young to take up these companies and try and fight for the environment?
So, I mean, my interest is really in public policy and just helping people to be part of decision-making processes, and that was my interest from a younger age. I mean, just seeing how I could be that bridge and how I could be a voice wherever I am for things that probably do not have a platform um, to be put out there. And so I was very privileged to work with so many incredible people that also inspired me to take action. I have seen um, a lot of people that were committed to working on a cause, even within their personal resources. And so for me, I think that also just gave me the courage and knowing that I'm not alone and that we're all in this together. I think that was really important um, for me to help me to keep going. I think that I have a part to play, and being a young African woman and growing up in a country like Malawi, and you see the kinds of problems that we face, and you want development for your country, but you also
Mm-hmm.
understand that historically development has not always worked to the benefit of everybody. In fact, a lot of countries that are well developed have got a lot of huge inequalities, and those are the kinds of things that I've grown up seeing in my own community, where you see huge gaps. And I find that for me, I am quite driven and quite motivated to be that person that speaks out against such inequality, against such problems, and that includes the different injustices on the environment in the course of development, and how they affect people that don't really have the platform to speak up, or don't even know that there are platforms available to them to speak up. So it's quite an interesting journey to also see that I have come from quite far as a
Mm-hmm.
young woman who was even afraid to do this kind of work, and to be able to appreciate that I am relevant and that so many young people are relevant, and to take that position and go with it.
It's so inspiring, the work that you do, and I hope that it inspires others to stand up and fight for what we believe in.
Thank you, Nancy. I truly hope that as well. And like I said, I've also been inspired by so many people that have gone before me, and to be sitting here now and to have been awarded this prize. First of all, it's not something that I think that anybody really thinks would ever happen to them, and
Mm-hmm.
it was really just for me a life-changing moment to say that the things that you think about, you dream about, sometimes are so much smaller than the things that you actually can achieve, the things that you can actually do. And the prize is evidence of this for me, to say that we could have thought we were doing this, but somebody saw that we were doing something so much bigger. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that really should speak to a lot of young people. I'm just one individual in a group of many, and my efforts were quite small, but just imagine to be able to make this kind of impact. And so if everyone took that kind of position and said, I can do something, the smallest things, it makes such a huge difference.
It does. And it's been 2 years after the ruling. Have the companies involved stopped the manufacture of single-use plastic?
So it's been a really hard journey, and like I said, it was an effort on our part, but also government. I think government has been very committed to this journey as well. And unfortunately, last year the companies applied for a judicial review, but just before the prize announcement, that was lifted, and government has already been actively shutting down companies and conducting inspections as we speak. So we have been so far delayed in the enforcement of the ban, and it's been an array of court battles. But we are victorious, and we have hope that within the next 2 years we'll see a huge difference. There are some companies that are still operating illegally, and this is the time that I think we need people to speak up and say, report such companies, but also engage those companies and inform them that what they're doing is illegal, and take the necessary action against them. It's been so expensive on the environment, because during the court battle, companies continued to produce plastics, and so there's still a lot of plastics within our communities, within our economy, and it's very hard to enforce the ban from the distributors because most of them are small businesses, and this is a very difficult time. So to confiscate, for example, those materials would actually be making those people worse off. So as of now, the focus is on companies, shutting down companies that are producing these plastics, and hopefully we will get to cleaning the mess up sooner than later.
But what's really amazing is that at least the government is coming in to help you to stop these companies.
Yeah, so I mean, actually, for us, when we joined the case, we wanted to support government. We often find ourselves on the other side where we're fighting government, but this was a very unique fight where we're fighting with government. And that was incredible. It was a really incredible moment for me. I think just showing the unity and the patriotism and the love that we have for our country, that even government had that commitment to see this ban through. So it's really been amazing fighting alongside government against single-use plastics, and it's also really great to see their continued commitment to really shutting down the industry entirely. And there have already been sentiments to the effect that they would like to completely ban plastics, and I think that would be incredible, and that's something that we're also very willing and happy to work with government towards.
That's amazing. And do you know, we can talk about single-use plastic and the bans, but you will find that most people don't understand the effects of single-use plastic on our health, the environment, as well as with animals. If you could explain the effects of single-use plastic.
So single-use plastics, and for Malawi, these are all the plastics that are under 60 microns. So they're quite thin, and usually people discard them immediately after use. Now, the problem with these plastics is that because they're so thin, they're very responsive to nature. So if it's wind, if it's water, if it's rain, they can easily be carried off, and they become part of the ecosystem. But because they're not biodegradable and they take very many years to actually degrade, it means that they're in those ecosystems for a very long time. So they alter the natural occurrence of that ecosystem. So if it's a river, then it means that those plastics will be in that river for a very long time. And because they are plastics, we have experienced different problems, like because they retain water, so you have an increase in issues of mosquitoes, and therefore leading to the increase in occurrence of malaria. But also they do carry around some diseases, like they contribute to cholera, for example, diarrhea, and a lot of other waterborne diseases. And we've also seen in Malawi instances where goats they can't really tell the difference between the plastic and nature when they're grazing in the field. So sometimes they do consume these plastics, and because sometimes they are salty because of the usage of them, they do consume the plastic thing. So once they ingest the plastics, goats cannot survive because the plastic cannot be digested, and it takes time to go through the digestive tract. So normally what it means is that the goat will suffer and die. It's a very painful death. It's very disturbing. And we've also seen even in cattle, for example, where once they ingest the plastic, it stays in their system for a very long time. So sometimes the cattle can't eat because it feels quite filled, and then it dies from starvation, actually, which is, I think, a very, it's the picture of it. It's just really bad when you think about it, and you think that it's because somebody made one decision to discard their plastic just anywhere. They refuse to take responsibility for that piece of plastic. So we can blame companies for producing plastics, but ultimately I think we ourselves need to acknowledge that we are the problem, and we need to start doing something about it. There's not much research in terms of what the impacts of plastic on our bodies when consumed through livestock, and so that means that we may not know what we have done to our bodies, to our health, to our children, until many years from now when that research is done. But for now, I think we can already be cautious and make better decisions in terms of how we manage our plastic waste.
It's actually so sad to realize that you can just buy one thing packaged maybe in plastic, and then it has such an effect on animals, on humans, on the environment.
Yeah. It's really amazingly painful to think of the chain itself. It's a chain of reaction, and it just starts with one small piece of plastic, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. So, what does winning the Goldman Prize mean to you and the continent of Africa?
It's incredible, Nancy. And first of all, I think it means opportunities for me to interact with people like yourself, and your subscribers and your audience. And this is something that I don't take for granted. To be able to have these kinds of conversations, I am 150% Pan African. I believe that we as Africans have the power to change the narrative for Africa. And so when we have such opportunities, when we have such platforms, for me, it's an incredible opportunity to speak to the need for us to come together and do better and do more for our countries and mainly for our continent. Um, but it also means for myself an opportunity to reflect on how much more I can give to the work that we do. So I'm very privileged to represent, like I said, a large number of people, and I don't take that for granted. So I'm very excited and very eager to make the most of this opportunity to influence policies, not just in Malawi, but even across the continent. And so I joined the fight in Malawi and in the continent to fight companies, not just in Malawi, but even across the globe, because the fossil fuel industry fuels plastic production. And so, I mean, we live in a very difficult time. This is where we have increasing planetary pressures. And so the conversations of our time are very different. Our age talks about how sustainable development can work, how development can be married with the environment, and how we can manage our environment and natural resources better. So it's a very interesting time for me to be part of that global conversation and continental conversation, and not just me, but everyone right now in Africa. It's an amazing time for us, especially young women. So yeah, that's pretty amazing for me.
So keeping it on the continent and Pan-Africanism, do you think that people, especially in Africa, have an understanding of how important the fight against climate change is?
To be honest, I think that as Africa, we have taken quite the back seat. We have perhaps focused more on adaptation, and it's because we've been told that we have to find a way to solve our problems for now. And that's understandable because, I mean, we are very far from where we would want to be as a continent in terms of development, and our problems are very different from the problems of other countries, especially in the global in the West. And so I think that the focus, there's an understanding of what climate change, the challenges of climate change are, but the perspective is very different. But for me, I think my urge has always been that in as much as we can focus now on adaptation and how we can respond to the climate crisis and the impacts now, we also really have to be visionary and think about what it means for our future. So while other countries are thinking of mitigating already, they're thinking of technologies that will enable them to still be very comfortable in the next few years in spite of the climate crisis. We need to start thinking the same way. We need to start thinking about how we can maximize our natural resources for the betterment of Africa. Um, there's currently a huge drive, for example, in the extractive sector for resources that will drive the energy transition. And, as Africa, we're still only considering providing those resources to other countries to start developing those technologies. But what we should be thinking is the fact that we have those resources and how we can already develop technologies that work for Africa, and enable us to get to a different level, because we have been here for too long, and we can't be thinking that we'll be receiving technologies from somewhere else. We need to start thinking of how we can create our own technologies and make our own context. And for me, that's something that I would urge a lot of young people to start thinking about how you can take part, in this shift, this global shift, because it is coming and we have to be prepared. So even if we refuse to acknowledge the different perspectives of it, we will still likely be on, the disadvantaged part of it if we don't take action now.
Wow. So, in light of what you've just said, do you think that African governments are injecting enough funds into the fight against climate change?
No, I don't think that we are, and it, from some part it comes because we don't have the funds. Um, but from another part, I think it also comes from a bit of deniability. So for Malawi, for example, we established a climate fund, a carbon levy rather, and with that came a carbon fund, which is supposed to contribute to climate response. Um, but so far, what we have seen, and this has been in place for like 3-4 years, what we have seen is that these resources go into, the national development pot, which is all right, but it's not really addressing climate problems. And so what it means is that 10 years from now, perhaps we'll still be thinking about the same challenges, despite having put up, resources that were supposed to address those challenges. So I think that there's a need for, a more clear-cut commitment. We can't only wait for funding or resources. We saw with America's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, it was a huge blow. We've seen now a lot of cuts because of the COVID crisis, a lot of cuts in development aid towards issues that are still very real for us, but because the world is facing different problems now, we're just not the focus. And so I think it's a wake-up call to us to say we need to start looking at how we can mobilize our own domestic resources to respond to the crisis that affects us primarily. And that's something I think a lot of us need to start being aware of.
With African governments, you have African governments and African countries. Do you think African countries are working as one in the fight against climate change? Or it's sectional, each country has their own policy. There is no one dimensional view to fighting the crisis.
I think there have been some efforts, but primarily our efforts are not, they're not concerted, and that's also why it comes back to my point about why we need to start looking beyond adaptation and thinking mitigation. So Malawi can try to mitigate, but because I think a couple of years ago we've experienced Cyclone Idai, for example. It affected not just Malawi, it affected Mozambique, it affected Zimbabwe even. So if you look at the challenge of climate change, it's not something that's going to happen to one country. It's going to happen to the continent. So if we're going to respond to climate change, it's something that we need to do together. We need to come up with regional policies and response and continental response. And a lot of that will start, by looking at how we as a continent can use our natural resources to improve the situation in our response to the climate crisis. But this is not something that comes out very strongly for me. And perhaps the current Conference of Parties will be an opportunity again for African countries to think about that, to think about how we can prioritize, because the global south has made it very clear that they have different priorities, and increasingly so it affects us. And so we need to start thinking of how we can work together, more clearly, and chart a way forward as a continent.
Right. So, lastly, what are your future plans?
My future plans. I certainly want to do more. And so for me, this is just the beginning. I am currently at a crossroads where I I have seen quite a lot of opportunities that have come up for what I can do, how much more I can do. I am currently working in the extractive sector, as I mentioned, and there's a lot of opportunities in that sector alone. But yeah, I'm very optimistic that I will do so much more, and I'm very committed to really realizing my purpose and doing my part in making Africa a better place.
Thank you so much, Gloria, for joining us on the program. We appreciate all the work that you are doing, because your work, like you said, is not only for Malawi,